Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's top of the hour. Thank you for joining KEAS. And I have, of course, with me Mark Cox as we present on KEAS. Hey, Mark.
Hi. How are you?
Good. So you want to talk a little bit about our topic today and why we chose it?
Yeah, well, it's that time of year where we're facing changes in our weather, changes in our time of daylight patterns, and sometimes this gets people down a little bit. It's too bad that we don't have the ability to play music like we did, and rightfully so. We had to stop that. But the song I would pick would be that classic by the Byrds called "Turn, Turn, Turn." Remember that? Everything there is a season.
Every season. Aren't you going to sing it for us?
Yeah. Well, no. I was counting on you. You're the one with the voice training, so you go ahead and break in the song anytime you'd like. So, but the seasons are very, very problematic for some people. For some of us, we kind of enjoy it and kind of enjoy the change, and for others, it is so problematic, in fact, that for some time in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, our manual that we observe as mental health professionals, there's been what has been called seasonal affective disorder. Now it's called depression with seasonal change, and so, but this is just simply that some people just get very, very depressed at different times of the year, and one of the criteria is that you have the typical manifestations of depression, such as low energy, kind of lethargic perhaps, maybe difficulty concentrating, difficulty with sleep, too much, too little, maybe eating too much, too little. The typical kind of vegetative symptoms that we see with depression, but the difference here is they start and end at one particular time of the year and do not occur at other times of the year. And so it is a big problem for some people that have this affects them in different ways. And so as we are one of the most drastic times of the year coming up, I think, when we change from summer to fall, this is certainly a time where a major prevalence of people have trouble here, but the deep winter also troubles people.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that there's a continuum, meaning not everyone gets, the depressive, extreme depressive symptoms that they might need a brief intervention. Some people do need to go on medication during that time of year. And then there's some of us also that get some of those symptoms, maybe mild or moderate, where we learn to cope with them and utilize a lot of resources to do that, to get through that time period. And also using the kind of reaction to, especially for some folks, it's typically the winter. I know living in New York, the winter was a big one for me. That using that to my advantage of when I would feel more introverted, kind of like the idea of, you're supposed to hibernate in the winter, and cave people did. It was a time for hibernation and reflection. So, there's two sides to it. Even when something might be more difficult, we could actually use it to our advantage. And so I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that as well as some other resources for those that, again, the physiological mechanism of not having sunlight, that's real. Studies have been done on this about the positive benefits of sunlight going through, how that affects us emotionally. And again, that being darker for more hours. In some countries, we know when it's, the winter tends alcoholism rates go up, people drinking goes up. And so, again, it's a real phenomenon of having less light and how that affects us.
And isn't that amazing, too? Those studies are just fascinating about how something that we really take for granted, light, and how that can have, as you mentioned, the uptick in lots of depressive symptoms, and even in the northern hemisphere, a lot of research in the extreme northern hemisphere, up by the North Pole, that people's suicide rates go up during that time of year, and that the hypothesis is because of the absence of light. It kind of goes into the webinar that Mr. Ryan Wan helped us with a couple of months ago, and we were talking about the benefits of green exercise, and that was one of the things there, that being outdoors, being in the light, that natural feeling nature, that's very beneficial. And so that is a fascinating aspect of this, and one of the coping skills is to turn on the light. You know, there's lots of light therapy that occurs with people during this time if need be, and that's one of the things that is getting in brighter lights is very important. I really like one of the things you said, Dr. Rotnowski, about turning this into something that is positive, because we are designed to need to hibernate, and I think many things is about our attitude heading into it. And if we say, oh boy, here comes winter, you know, kind of like who was the character in Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore, you know, oh boy, you know, and so if we have that kind of attitude, then we're not going to do as well. But if we say, hey, here's a time where we can kind of reinvest, hibernate, re-energize, I think that can be very beneficial.
Yes. So again, I think the importance is knowing when it goes beyond where it's healthy, right? So, you know, years ago when I lived in New York, I used to pretty much go and sleep most of the day and bury myself under my blanket. And that wasn't healthy.
Yeah. I can't even imagine that. Okay, so that is very interesting. And,
well,
you know,
let me tell you.
I wanted to ask you about that too, because you lived on the East Coast where there are 4 seasons. I'm a Westerner. We don't have many drastic changes of seasons out here. What, not just going into winter, but what did you experience in the other changes of seasons as well?
Well, you know, for me, it was really the winter. It was so profound. I think any other reactions to those seasons I wouldn't notice, except I can say I would have an increased energy, obviously, when the spring would come. I mean, a really increase in energy. So, again, it's a whole balance act. But for me, it was much more profound in the winter. The lack of light, the cold, the not being able to do as much activity really affected me. And honestly, it got really a lot better moving to California. So for those that need to do that, you know, yeah. California is a good place to be because I barely noticed it. It's still there, but not as extreme at all.
That is amazing. Yeah, I've heard that same testimony from lots of people that live in the East Coast or the upper Northwest, and that, you know, the winters are just brutal. Not only the temperature, but just the, you know, you feel kind of stuck. I know my son now lives in Minnesota, and I was impressed back there. They have so many large indoor malls, and they're all very brightly lit. And the idea, of course, they have Mall of America, but they have that's not the only one. They have others. And they're very brightly lit, and people go there, and they have water slides in there and things, and they do those year-round. And so it really points to, you know, people that are there are trying to say, hey, we realize there's an issue with this seasonal change, and what can we do to adapt? And I think that's important. And now I think that, you know, a lot of this, too, that one of the reasons we wanted to bring this out now is just the more, as you pointed out, they're still very significant, but they're not maybe to that clinical level of depression. But we see the changes in schedules that and the changes that these seasonal things bring with them that do affect us and can even raise some anxiety. And especially what we've gone through in the last month is that famous time of year, back to school. And so that's one of the big issues. That might be why this time of year is difficult for me, is I never wanted to go back to school. I was not a school kid. I never wanted to do school. I guess I probably shouldn't say that, but I just dreaded the end of summer. And so that was more of a psychological effect for me because I had to enter into this different sociological world. And so I think these two kind of collide at some point.
Well, it's a really good point, especially for those that are listening, you know, that are parents and how their children or, you know, young adults might be reacting to the idea of going back to school, be it, you know, junior high, high school, college. That's really ingrained from a very young age, the idea of, you know, for me, obviously, it was after Labor Day being from New York, and how you kind of get a little depressed knowing, like, there's the end of your fun summer. So, again, knowing that our children and adult children have reactions to this as well, not just us.
Right, and I think even, you know, to kind of go along with that, even adults returning to school, you know, we have many employees that, you know, are pursuing higher degrees and starting programs and things like this at this time of year, too. And it really is a kind of a readjustment of the schedule is such a big issue because, you know, you kind of have this, or I do, you have this idea that, well, you know, I can kind of relax. I'm not under the pressure right now of needing to get this assignment done or whatever. And so I can kind of let that go. But then suddenly, nope, I can't let it go anymore. It's time. And so that affects us as adults too.
You know, it's
I think
really
one of the ways, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I know it's hard when we're not in the same room.
Yes, it is different.
Just recently I had this reflection that I realized something the opposite, that something good. I used to always be really excited about the summer coming, you know? And now as an adult, you know, now obviously I guess I'm considered, I hate to say the word middle age. I hate that word.
Well, you're younger than I am, so that helps. Okay.
But I no longer get that excitement in the summer.
Right.
So it's interesting. So there's kind of pros and cons to it all because, you know, growing up, the summer was exciting and you were happy, and it's just not the same because it's not, doesn't have the same meaning anymore the way my life has changed, obviously, when you're working and, you know, your kids are older and you don't really take vacation in the summer anymore or whatever the case may be. So that was really interesting that I just realized that only recently. So I lost that excitement about the summer.
Right. You know, I think that's important to realize, you know, the responsibilities of life do just kind of weigh us down and changes our whole outlook, you know, and you know, it is interesting. I think people living down here being in the Coachella Valley, they really look forward to winter because it kind of cools off, you know. So it all depends on where you live, I guess, you know, and because I hear people down here talking about, wow, I can't wait for the heat to break, you know, and so you know, that's a positive time. This is a beautiful time. The winter this is a beautiful place to be in the winter. So that's for sure.
You know, I also want to remind people about our chat feature for those that are listening. If you want to let us know if you're affected by the seasons, let us know how, and then we can read those out to others as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If you're interested in this topic, we'd love to be interested in knowing why and how you might be affected, and maybe if you are, what's some things that have helped you get through the challenging times.
I think one of the things that I did in preparation for this is I interviewed some experts, and I went around our office to those that have young children at home, and I said, so how is this back to school, change of season, how does it affect you guys, you know, the moms and dads? And so there are experts today, and so here's a couple of things that they said that are really important. They said the one thing is the sleep patterns or sleep hygiene. You know, you kind of, you know, the kids are kind of used to, well, I'm staying up a little later and I'm sleeping in a little more, and then suddenly, boom, you know, they're back on a school schedule. And they said that fighting that sleep pattern was one of the biggest issues that they faced during this time. And I started thinking about that, and I said, that's true with anybody. You know, when our sleep pattern changes, and especially if it gets shortened, life becomes more difficult. So that blessed sleep is really important here during this time of year.
I thought you might have more.
No, I thought the line went dead, so I'm sorry. Okay. So yeah, so I think then the other thing then that goes along with that, with sleep, is study habits. And so the idea that now I've got to hit the books, you know, so how are we going to get back into homework routine, and do we do homework, you know, at study time during school, or do we do it as soon as we get home from school? Do we do it after dinner? You know, I would recommend doing it as soon as we get home from school, getting that wrapped up. That's traditionally the best way to go, and then you have the evening free and get to sleep at a good hour. But sometimes the study that some of these kids, especially high schoolers that are, you know, reaching out for higher education, and some of the projects and things that these guys do just amazes me, what they have, how much work they put in, and how smart they are. Really smart. We have some really smart teenagers that are working really hard. And then the third thing they said is just the general attitude of the kids. You know, if the kids don't adjust well, they're not sleeping well, maybe the study habits are a problem, then we see that, you know, they're complaining a little more about food. They're complaining a little more about, you know, where they want to go on the weekends. And so that general attitude, everything, it just kind of throws that off, and that can permeate the entire family relationship. So I think that is something to consider here in this time of seasonal change is it really can just kind of insidiously enter into the family and create this havoc. And so it really is important to have to maintain a good structure. And remember, there's still 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, still 7 days in a week, and it's just that things look a little different. There's different limitations that we have with the difference in seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's interesting that some of the limitations are outdoor activities. Did you know, Dr. Aronofsky, that on the 22nd of September, that is the autumnal equinox? Now, I just wanted to mention that because I love saying the word autumnal, isn't it? That's just, I just want to mix that into everyday vocabulary. Well, it's very autumnal of you. So, but that is where then with the amount of light starts to change, and so we're starting to see some of that difference. Now, that's not our time change. That's not until November 4/5, the early morning of November 5th, is when we see what do. We fall back. So we're going to fall back, and when that time change comes, when we used to work in the same place together, we would come at that time change, and we'd say, "My goodness, how dark it is so early," and where it was just light the week before, and so it is really, really difficult at early days of this fall time change. And because then that limits what we can do outside, it limits what we can do just all around. And so it challenges that green exercise thing that I mentioned earlier because of the less light. And I think that's important because all of these limitations that we feel even because of the time structuring changes, I think that creates some problems for us emotionally as well. And again, we just have to adapt. We have to adjust and say, what can I do with more lighting, or what can I do with changing my activities to something that's indoors or whatever it might be. So we have to make adjustments for that time change coming up.
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, trying to get out more during the day because the hours are limited. Again, when we come to work, it's dark, and then we leave work, it's dark. That's always the hardest. But then again, also appreciating what those changes could bring, and that's what I talked about a little bit earlier. The idea is like, I tend to do less activities. I go out a little less in the winter, and I've come to appreciate that, and liking that kind of calm and introspection and reflection, turning the energy down just a little bit. That's actually quite healthy. You could equate it to sleep. Sometimes people have difficulty sleeping, and what they say, the experts say, it's fine if you can't fall asleep. Don't worry about that, because sometimes people stress. I can't fall asleep. I'm awake. Right. And it creates more stress. They say just lie there and just be still and be quiet and just relax. That at least it gives some type of restful state. So there is something to this hibernation of this restful state where there's less distractions and there's less activity, which brings usually less stress.
Right. Yeah, and that's true. And so I think it can be very pleasant. I'm looking here and thinking about the things that do occur, and if you're in a store these days, you see that they're ramping up for. I saw a store with some Christmas decorations up already, and so with the holidays coming on, we tend to think of that as a very busy time. But there is something about that it is very restful too. It's kind of a peaceful time where you can be with family and hopefully just enjoy that time and be introspective. And I think that's another way. I think oftentimes we get very busy during the holidays, maybe too much so. So we have to really kind of set some boundaries and limits so that we can enjoy that time as well. So those holidays are right around the corner. So, and that's something to think of with the seasonal change too. One of the other things that was mentioned by one of our fellow colleagues here was the importance of wardrobing changes. That now it's not just the no white after Labor Day kind of thing, but it's just the layering that you have to do. So you might, I've actually not worn a sport coat down here for the last few weeks, and so, but I'll be putting my sport coat back on as time comes on and just to be warm, and so wardrobing does make a big difference, and I think that is something you dress in layers when it gets a little cooler, and then you dress in layers when it gets a little warmer because you have to be able to cool down, and so that's important. Now, our ambassador of health, Dr. Wilson, she wanted to point out that dietary changes can make a difference too,
yes.
because and the main thing that she said is the lack of access to seasonal vegetables, and I can agree with this. I mean, you can pay for melon in the middle of winter, but boy, do you pay, and so we do decrease access to regular seasonal vegetables, and we have to make some changes. I go from peaches to pears, and so pears are my wintertime go-to for fruit, and because they are a little more accessible in the winter and peaches, you can't hardly find them that are tasty and less than a small fortune, and so I think that's just one example. There's lots of green vegetables in the winter that are very good and very available that aren't available at different times of the year, and I like that too. And so I think that just the produce issue is different, but then the dietary changes, we tend to eat a little more, and we tend to, and so we want to be careful about that. We want to maintain a good diet through our all year round, and we want to be careful of that and mindful, especially as we get back to schedule changes and things like this, that our diet kind of fits with that, and we are able to adjust that accordingly.
Absolutely. So, so far we've highlighted a lot of different variables that impact us during the various seasons. In particular, we're talking about now the changing from summer to fall, including, sleep because of extracurricular activity and regular activity, how that might change with kids or yourself going back to school. We're talking about sleep patterns. We're talking about, what your nutrition is, how you eat. And then, of course, the other aspect is the psychological from your history of what you bring to the table, so to speak. So there's certain things that were significant during this time of year in your life, be it a holiday or an anniversary, be it a good anniversary or one that's, a significant loss. Those are the things that also come up during the seasons of change, because obviously the seasons of change, literally, fall, spring, or summer, winter, relates to also us, the seasons of change, and looking where we are in our lives. There's a lot of parallels here, from an existential perspective as well. Yeah,
right, absolutely. And I think that's very good, very important to keep in mind that, I think that sometimes, the greatest personal loss of my life occurred during the holidays, and so probably for 20 years, I had very poor outlook about the holidays. It wasn't until my kids were born and I could enjoy that with them that I worked through some of that. And so I think some of these things that occurred during particular seasons we associate with that season. And it's not necessarily the season as much as it is our own stuff, and so we have to kind of work on that and work through that.
And I think that's the point you made about how your perspective changed as new things came to your life, and you were open to that, having kids, having new things. Yes, we have lost, but there's also things that are gifts that we receive, and so to be appreciative of that and look forward to those things as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And talking about looking forward, that's a good segue. We'll talk about anticipation of spring. The time change back, by the way, for those of you that are interested, occurs in March, and right about the time of the vernal equinox. I got to say vernal, autumnal and vernal in the same thing. That's pretty cool. So that's on March 20th, and so what happens is, I'm looking forward to that. I've got events planned for the spring that I'm looking forward to, and so even already I'm thinking ahead, and I think that's important. This is all cyclical. We may have missed out on some opportunities this year, but make adjustments for next year, and look back and say, these are the things that I need to change, or look forward and say, hey, I want to do the same thing because I had a great summer, and I want to do the same kind of thing next year and maybe even better. And so it's all cyclical. We're going to get another shot at it, and so we just ride this out and ride these changes out, and we'll get into a better place. So with that, I think we're getting ready to come to a close. Did you have anything else, Dr. Arnowski?
No, I mean, I was just thinking, you know, for some folks, you know, especially for those of us that have older parents, that you can't help but be mindful. You know, you think of what they're thinking, you know, and talking about seasons of life, and knowing that, you know, and we're maybe more aware of, you know, ultimate how things will change, and eventually either they, you know, sometimes they're sick. We have parents that are sick, or we have parents that are thinking about their own finality, so to speak, you know. So that's, again, talk about existential issues, the idea of life and death. That's just part of life as well. I know as a society we tend to not want to think about death, but it is natural, and it's something we have to come to terms with. And again, I think it's, you know, some of us, we're more mindful of it now is, again, either, you know, if we have older parents, and we, you know, I know my dad thinks about that as well. And that's part of life. So I just want to put that out there as well, because that's very significant. That kind of affects everything. It kind of puts everything on as far as, you know, the regular seasons in life, like where am I in my life? Was my life, did my life have meaning? What does it mean now? What am I leaving as my legacy? I mean, that takes us full circle.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
People call it morbid, but I don't think it's morbid. I think it's just life. It's just part of life.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, it has to be addressed. Absolutely, it has to be addressed. And I think that it is a big part of life, not only for those going through that time, but for those of us that are caregivers. You know, it affects us as well in our generation. So, and you know, caring for them because we love them, and we're kind of helping them through this time of life. It is a challenge, though, isn't it? And so, but again, you know, even in that, I see the changes and how it can affect the elderly so much. Winter is hard on the elderly. It really is. But it really is, as you say, it is a part of life. So.
And then, of course, on another level, just to add, you know, again, our thoughts and our hearts are with all those that have been impacted by the terrible tragedies around the country.
Oh, yeah. Wow, yeah.
Around the country and internationally. From these
Yeah.
horrible natural earthquakes and hurricanes, and, you know, it's, you know, talk about seasons of change. And, you know, climate and what's going on there. So, you know, I just want to mention that because that's real, that's going on right now. And also we just passed 9/11, another anniversary for many folks. So, yeah, lots of events and life events to consider, even if we're not directly affected, you know, thinking about those larger events, because we're all part of that. We're all part of the universe. We're all human beings. That's part of what's going on, too, that happens during certain seasons, you know, these type of, you know, horrific natural events increasing. But
yeah, it certainly makes you step back and give pause when you see how many people are suffering, and you know, we all want to do and reach out in ways that we can help, and I think that it is really kind of makes us put our own lives in perspective at some point.
Exactly. So again, you know, well, no matter what we're thinking about, you know, we could always think about, well, what's important to me, what's important to my family, what could I do that creates meaning in my life? You know, think of those things as well, beyond ourselves, beyond our family, thinking of others. Again, you know, we usually talk about this topic around Thanksgiving because, you know, we should have that kind of, you know, time of reflection and thinking and being grateful. But obviously we should not do that just around one holiday. So we think about that as well, of, you know, what do we want this season in our life to be, so to speak, this season of my life, you know, as I define my life, right? So what do I want my season to be? How do I want to, you know, spend my days? How do I want to give of my time, give of myself?
Right, and I think that's very critical to have that attitude where we give back, you know, and we really stay invested and not give up, but really keep swinging, as it were, and keep at it. So, well, I think I have a webinar for EAS in 2 weeks, I believe it is, on grandparenting. So that's
something you know something about?
Yeah, I know a little bit about that. I have 3 grandchildren, and so we're going to talk about the joys of grandparenting and then some of the challenges for people that are raising their grandchildren, and try to give them some resources on that too. We're hoping to get a guest speaker on that, but we'll see. If not, we'll handle it. But so that's coming up. I believe that date is on the 26th of September. So I think that's the next time we have a EAS related webinar, and we do always welcome your suggestions for topics for our participants that you would suggest, and let us know what you would like to hear us chat about on KEAS. So.
And also, I'll remind people that, our new office where Mark is sitting, and I am not, but Mark is in Bermuda Dunes, our new office. Right. We left Cathedral City, and so it's a nice new office. I know we got a lot of positive feedback, so we'll let people know that that's something new for us and for you to benefit from us being closer to those folks that are out in India.
Very centrally located to the Coachella Valley and right off the freeway, and so people are just, that's the feedback that we get mostly, is that, wow, this is so much easier to get to, and so so that's good, and we appreciate that, because we think we're going to be able to serve more people here.
So remember, if you or you know someone that's an employee or your family members, we're always here to help you. You can always reach us and come to one of our offices located in downtown Riverside, as well as Bermuda Dunes.
Right.
All
well,
right.
Thank you, Dr. Ornowski.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for the audience, and we look forward to doing this again. Bye for now.
All right. Thank you.